David Miller was a man burdened by an inescapable past. At 42, he had built a successful life as a real estate developer in New York City, but none of his accomplishments seemed to fill the void that Laura had left. 2 decades had passed since she died in a tragic car accident, an event that David had never moved on from. During the day, he was seen as a practical and determined businessman, dominating the city's real estate market with a firm hand. But at night, when the skyscrapers dimmed their lights and the city fell into an unsettling silence, David became a shadow of the man others knew. Instead of celebrating his victories, he found himself staring at old photographs he kept of Laura, reminiscing about the moments when the future seemed promising. They had been inseparable during their youth. They met one summer in San Francisco, 2 young people full of dreams, with the world at their feet. Laura was the kind of person who lit up any room, and David, though more reserved, flourished by her side. They planned to get married, travel the world, and build a life together. But all of that shattered on a rainy November night when David received a call that would forever change his life. Since then, he had lived with the feeling that an essential part of himself had died with her. Every decision he made in his professional life felt like an attempt to fill the void, to find some form of redemption for what had happened. But the truth was that he had never allowed himself to move on. The memories of Laura were always there, like ghosts haunting him, reminding him of what he had lost. David knew he needed to continue his life, that he should move forward, but the silent grief infiltrated every aspect of his existence. His personal relationships never thrived. He avoided deep connections, fearing that cruel fate could snatch another person away from him. His closest friends tried to help him, encouraging him to seek therapy, to talk about what had happened, but he always closed himself off. Speaking about Laura was to relive the trauma, and he could not bear the pain once again. One day, while walking through the bustling streets of Manhattan, something stirred within him. Perhaps it was the season, the cold autumn air mingling with the sound of leaves being swept away by the wind. Or maybe it was the fact that the anniversary of Laura's death was approaching again. Every November, he felt the pain more intensely. David was tired of living in a prison of memories, feeling as if he could never escape the past. What he didn't know was that this autumn would bring something unexpected, something that would force him to confront his greatest fears and revisit the moments he had long tried to bury. And so, without him realizing it, the reunion with his past was about to happen. Hashtag, it was a cold night in New York, the kind of night where the biting autumn wind made people hurry along the sidewalks. David Miller was driving through downtown, his thoughts drifting back to memories of Laura, like so many other times. The lights of the tall buildings and the still open shops reflected in his window as he wandered aimlessly, trying to escape the growing emptiness inside him. Then something caught his attention. As he passed by a less crowded street, David spotted a young woman sitting on the sidewalk near a closed store. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and her face, partially hidden by loose hair, revealed an expression of despair. Her eyes scanned the surroundings as if searching for something or someone, but without hope. It was a sight that would break anyone's heart. David slowed the car, a strange feeling washing over him. He wasn't the type to get involved in other people's dramas, especially after years of avoiding any deep emotional connection. But there was something about that woman that compelled him to stop. Maybe it was the way she looked so vulnerable, or the pain in her eyes that somehow mirrored his own. He parked the car and stepped out, hesitantly. As he approached, he could see she was trembling, not just from the cold. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than he expected. The young woman looked up, surprised by his approach. "I don't know what to do," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "My son, he's sick. I don't have any money. They said that without payment, they won't continue the treatment." David felt a tightness in his chest at her words. Suddenly, he was transported back to a time when he too knew the feeling of helplessness, when he realized there was nothing he could do to save Laura. He couldn't let that happen again, not with her. Without thinking twice, he pulled out his wallet and took out $500. "This should help, at least for now." She looked at him with eyes filled with surprise and gratitude, but also with something else, a hint of doubt, perhaps. "I can't accept this. You You don't even know me." David shrugged, his expression remaining neutral, but something inside him began to stir. "Sometimes, you just need a helping hand. Everyone has been there." He extended the money, hoping she would take it. She hesitated, but finally took the bills with trembling hands. Thank you so much. My name is Olivia. Olivia Carter." She looked at him for a few seconds, as if trying to recognize him from somewhere, but then she averted her gaze. David froze for a moment. Carter. The surname sounded strangely familiar in his ears, but he couldn't quite grasp why. The name brought an unsettling feeling, like an echo of something he should remember but couldn't. He pushed the feeling aside for now, not wanting to dive too deep into improbable theories. "I'm David," he said briefly. "Don't worry, I hope this helps your son." Olivia nodded, her voice still choked. "It helps more than you can imagine. I was almost giving up." "Don't give up," David replied almost automatically, "no matter how impossible it seems." As he walked back to his car, he felt a strange sensation in his stomach. Something about Olivia, or perhaps the way everything had unfolded, stirred something within him in an unexpected way. And when he looked back, seeing her walk down the sidewalk, clutching the bills as if her life depended on it, he knew that this encounter hadn't been a coincidence. It had been almost 20 years since he felt something like that. Something beyond the emptiness Laura had left behind. Now, he wondered if fate was, in some way, playing with him again. Maybe, just maybe, Olivia was more than a desperate stranger on an ordinary night. It seems that there is no specific text provided above for translation. If you have a particular text you'd like me to translate into English, US, please share it, and I'll be happy to assist you. Sure. However, I don't see any text above that needs translation. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate, and I'll be happy to assist you. Sure. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate, and I'll be happy to help with that. Sure. Please provide the text you would like translated, and I'll assist you with that. Sure. Please provide the text you would like me to translate, and I'll be happy to assist you. Sure. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate, and I'll be happy to assist you. Sure. Please provide the text you would like me to translate, and I'll ensure it meets your requirements for accuracy and fluency in American English. The next morning, David felt a familiar heaviness as he drove to the cemetery, the bouquet of white lilies resting on the passenger seat. It was a tradition he had kept every year, always on this date, ever since Laura's passing. The memories, the pain, they never faded. Today, as he made his way through the quiet pathways lined with autumn leaves, he felt more unsettled than usual, the encounter with Olivia lingering in his mind. He parked his car and walked towards Laura's grave, his heart aching with each step. The chill of the morning air was sharp, matching the coldness he always felt when he came here. As he approached, he saw the familiar headstone etched with her name. Gently, he placed the flowers at the base, his fingers trembling slightly as he arranged them with care. "I miss you, Laura," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. "I still don't know how to move on." He stepped back, closing his eyes briefly, letting the silence engulf him. But then, something caught his attention, a movement to his left. When he turned, his breath caught in his throat. There, just a few feet away, was Olivia, the same young woman he had helped last night. She was kneeling, her head bowed, hands clasped together as if in prayer. And she was in front of the same grave, Laura's grave. David's mind reeled. How was this possible? His pulse quickened, 1,000 questions swirling in his head, but none making sense. He watched her for a moment, frozen in place, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. He took a tentative step forward. "Olivia," he called out softly, his voice laced with disbelief. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide as they met his. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the confusion and shock mirrored in both their expressions. Slowly, Olivia stood, her hands trembling as she wiped away tears he hadn't noticed before. What are you doing here?" David asked, his voice barely steady. "Why are you at Laura's grave?" Olivia hesitated, glancing at the headstone, then back at him. "I was going to ask you the same thing," she said quietly, her voice strained. "Who are you?" David shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "I'm David Miller. I knew Laura a long time ago, but you were here last night, and now you're here at her grave. How do you know her?" For a moment, it seemed like Olivia might not answer. She looked down, her hands gripping each other tightly. Then, as if making a decision, she took a deep breath and met his gaze again. "She was my mother." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. He felt the ground shift beneath him, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. Your mother?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." Olivia's eyes were filled with a pain that matched his own. "She died when I was little. I never really knew her. My father, well, the man I thought was my father, he left us. I grew up with my aunt, but I always wanted to know more about my mom." David's world was spinning. He stared at Olivia, seeing her for the first time, not just as a stranger, but as a link to his own past. Could it be true? Could Laura have had a child? His child? And he never knew? What was your father's name?" he asked, his voice trembling now. Olivia bit her lip, as if the answer was something she'd held onto for too long. "I don't know. My aunt never talked about him. But when I was old enough, I found some old letters my mom wrote to him. They were never sent. And in them, she talked about you." David felt like he was drowning. He took a step back, needing to steady himself. "About me? Laura wrote about me?" Olivia nodded, her eyes searching his face. "Yes, she loved you. She said she was scared, that she didn't want to hold you back. That's why she never told you. But you're my father, David." For a moment, everything went silent. The world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them standing in the shadow of Laura's memory. David's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the reality he was now forced to face. He looked at Olivia, his daughter, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt something shift inside him. The emptiness, the grief, it all started to change, transforming into something new. Uncertainty, yes, but also a fragile hope. "Olivia, his voice broke. He reached out, but then hesitated, his hand hovering in the air between them. "I didn't know. I never knew." "I know," she whispered, her own voice breaking. "I came here to find out who you were. I needed to know." David took a deep breath, his mind still reeling. But there was no turning back now. "We have so much to talk about. I don't even know where to start." "Maybe we start here," Olivia said softly, gesturing to the grave. "With her. With the truth." David nodded, his heart aching with a bittersweet sorrow. "Yeah, with her." And as they stood there, two strangers connected by the past, by a love long lost but never forgotten, the possibility of a new beginning flickered between them. David stood there, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The revelation that Olivia was his daughter had left him reeling, but the reality of it, the enormity of it, was only just starting to sink in. He stared at her, his mind racing to piece together the fragments of the past that had eluded him for so long. "Why are you here?" His voice trembled as he took a step closer, his eyes searching hers for answers. "Who are you, really?" Olivia hesitated, glancing away as if the weight of his questions was too much to bear. "I told you. Laura was my mother." "But why now?" David's voice rose, the confusion giving way to frustration. "Why did you come to me last night? Why here, at her grave? What are you trying to tell me?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze, determined. "I came because I needed to know the truth. I needed to find you." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wiped at her eyes. "All my life, I've wondered who my real father was. The man who raised me. He left us when I was a baby. My aunt told me he was too scared to handle the responsibility. I thought he was my father, but then I found the letters." David's heart pounded in his chest. "Letters?" "Yes," Olivia nodded, her voice breaking slightly. "Letters my mom wrote to you, but never sent. I found them a few years ago. She was pregnant when you were together. She was scared, and she didn't want to hold you back from your career, from your dreams. So she left." David's breath caught in his throat. He remembered those months when Laura had seemed distant, when she'd left suddenly without much explanation. He had been devastated, but he had forced himself to move on, thinking she had simply outgrown their relationship. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I had no idea. Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I know. I came here because I needed to see you. I needed to know if you were the man my mom wrote about. The man she loved so much she was willing to let him go. David felt a surge of emotions he couldn't even begin to name. Guilt, regret, sorrow, all mixed with a strange, fragile hope. He reached out, almost instinctively, wanting to offer comfort, but he stopped himself, unsure if she would welcome it. And last night, when I found you, you knew who I was? No, Olivia shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't know. I was desperate, scared for my son. I thought I was completely alone. But then you appeared, and you helped me, and I thought maybe it was fate, or just some cruel twist of the universe. David took a deep breath, his mind spinning. Your son? He's my grandson? Olivia nodded, her lips quivering. Yes, his name is Ethan. He's 6. David's heart clenched at the thought of a grandson he'd never met, a child who was part of him, part of Laura. He felt the enormity of it all pressing down on him, threatening to crush him, but he forced himself to stay focused. Olivia, I don't know what to say. I'm still trying to process all of this. Olivia took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes again. I don't need you to say anything. I just needed you to know. I needed to understand why my mom did what she did, why she chose to keep you out of my life. David shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. She thought she was protecting me, but she kept me from the most important thing I could have ever had. They stood there, both struggling to hold onto some semblance of composure, as the magnitude of what they had lost and what they had found in each other hung heavily in the air. David looked at her, really looked at her, and saw Laura's eyes, Laura's spirit in this young woman before him. I want to be a part of your life, Olivia. I know I can't change the past, but I want to be there for you. For Ethan. His voice cracked, but he kept going. If you'll let me. Olivia's expression softened, and for a moment, the distance between them seemed to close. I don't know what this means for us, David. I don't know if I can just accept everything right away. But I came here for a reason, and I think that reason is bigger than both of us. David nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. I'll be there. I promise. For the first time, Olivia managed a small, tentative smile. We'll figure it out, one step at a time. As they stood there, surrounded by the quiet of the cemetery, the shared pain and the hope of something new, David felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of purpose, of connection. Perhaps Laura had known what she was doing after all. Perhaps this was her way of bringing them together, of giving them a chance to heal the wounds of the past. Thank you, Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible, for listening, for being here. David nodded, his eyes locked on hers, the promise of something new and fragile between them. Thank you for finding me. And as they turned away from the grave, walking side by side, there was a sense that maybe, just maybe, the future held more than just the shadows of the past. David felt as if the ground had vanished beneath him, as if everything he'd known was crumbling away. The truth, the words Olivia had spoken, echoed in his mind, too staggering to fully comprehend. He stared at her, trying to process what she had just revealed. You're my daughter? His voice was hoarse, barely audible. His heart pounded painfully in his chest as he tried to grasp the enormity of it. But how? Laura never told me. She never said anything. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, and she looked at him with a mixture of sorrow and determination. She didn't want to hold you back. She thought you were better off without the burden of knowing, without feeling obligated to stay. David shook his head, his mind spinning. A burden? Is that what she thought? He struggled to keep his emotions in check, but his voice wavered, the pain breaking through. She was pregnant, and she didn't tell me. I would have been there, Olivia. I would have stayed. I loved her. God, I still love her. The admission tore through him, the words raw and unfiltered. It was a truth he had buried deep inside for years. But now, faced with Olivia, it came rushing to the surface, uncontainable. He had spent 2 decades trying to move on, but he had never truly let go of Laura. And now, to know that she had kept something so monumental from him, that he had missed out on raising his own child, it was almost unbearable. Olivia wiped at her tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. I know it's a lot to take in. I've spent my whole life wondering who you were, what kind of person you were. I didn't even know if you'd want to meet me. But then I found those letters, and I saw how much she cared about you, how much she wanted to protect you. She thought she was doing the right thing. David's hands clenched into fists at his sides, frustration and sorrow warring within him. She thought she was protecting me by keeping me away from my own child? His voice cracked, and he looked at Olivia, his eyes filled with anguish. Do you have any idea what it's like to find out like this? To realize that I lost not just her, but you, too? Olivia nodded, her tears spilling over. I do, because I lost you, too, David. I grew up not knowing who my father was, not knowing if I was even wanted. My aunt tried her best, but she could never give me answers, and the man I thought was my dad left us when I was just a baby. I've been searching for you my whole life, even when I didn't know who you were. David's heart ached as he listened to her. He felt an overwhelming need to reach out, to hold her, to somehow make up for all the lost time. I'm so sorry, Olivia, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. If I'd known. I know. Olivia took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. That's why I'm here. To understand, to figure out where we go from here. I don't know if we can ever make up for all those lost years, but I needed to see you, to know you. David reached out then, hesitantly placing a hand on her shoulder. I want to know you, too. I want to be in your life, Olivia, and in Ethan's, if you'll let me. For a moment, Olivia just looked at him, the pain and uncertainty clear in her eyes. But then, slowly, she nodded. I don't know what this means for us, David. It's not going to be easy, but I want to try. A surge of relief washed over David, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We'll take it one step at a time, he said softly. Whatever you need, I'll be here. The silence that followed was heavy, but not with the same weight as before. It was filled with something new, possibility, hope. As they stood there, 2 people bound by a past they could never change, there was a sense of tentative connection forming between them. David glanced back at Laura's grave, his heart aching with a bittersweet mix of love and regret. I wish she'd told me, he murmured, more to himself than to Olivia. I wish I could have been there for both of you. Olivia followed his gaze, her own expression softening. She did what she thought was best. But you're here now. That's what matters. David nodded, swallowing hard as he turned back to her. We can't change the past, but I promise you, I'll be here for you from now on, for as long as you'll have me. Olivia's eyes shimmered with fresh tears, but this time, there was a hint of a smile on her lips. Okay, she said softly, we'll figure it out. And as they stood there, the wind gently rustling the leaves around them, it felt as if something had shifted. The past still lingered, but it no longer held the same power over them. They were moving forward, step by step, into a future that, while uncertain, was filled with the promise of something new. David had thought that finding Olivia, knowing the truth, would somehow bring him peace. Instead, he found himself sinking deeper into the torment of what might have been. Every night, sleep eluded him as his mind replayed the scenes he had missed. Laura, alone and scared, carrying his child. Olivia, growing up without a father. The weight of it all was almost too much to bear. He spent his days drifting through memories, poring over old photographs and letters, trying to understand the choices Laura had made. Why had she kept him in the dark? What kind of life had she and Olivia endured without him? The questions gnawed at him, and he knew that the only way to find peace was to uncover the full truth. So, he reached out to the people who had known Laura best. Her old friends, their mutual acquaintances, anyone who might have a piece of the puzzle he was missing. Each conversation was a painful step deeper into a past he barely recognized. One rainy afternoon, he sat in a small cafe, Facing Sarah, Laura's best friend from college. She had aged, her hair streaked with gray, but the warmth in her eyes was the same as he remembered. "David, I'm glad you found Olivia," she said, her voice gentle, "but I wish you had known sooner." Laura was so scared back then. David's heart tightened. Scared of what, Sarah? Why did she leave? Why didn't she tell me? Sarah sighed, stirring her coffee absently. "It wasn't about you, David. It was about him, Mark, the man she was with after you." David frowned. "I didn't even know she was with someone else. She met him after she left New York. He seemed nice at first, but things changed." Sarah looked away, her expression darkening. "He became possessive, controlling. And when Laura found out she was pregnant, it only got worse." David felt a chill run down his spine. What did he do? He isolated her, kept her from her friends, her family. She was terrified, David. Terrified that he'd hurt her, or worse, hurt Olivia. That's why she ran. She left everything behind to protect her daughter. The words hit David like a punch to the gut. He had imagined so many scenarios, but never this. Why didn't she come to me? I would have helped her. I would have. She didn't think she had a choice, Sarah interrupted softly. She knew you were starting your career, building your life. She thought if she told you, he'd come after you, too. She was willing to do anything to keep you safe. David's hands shook as he absorbed her words. The image of Laura, strong, vibrant Laura, living in fear, hiding to protect their child, was almost unbearable. "I should have been there," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I should have known." Sarah reached across the table, her hand warm over his. "You couldn't have known. She made sure of that. But you're here now, David, and Olivia needs you." David nodded, though the guilt still churned in his chest. I feel like I failed them both." "You didn't fail, David," Sarah said firmly. "You're doing what you can now, and that's what matters." Later that night, David found himself in his small, dimly lit apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his search. Letters, old photographs, scraps of the life he had missed. He picked up one of the unsent letters Olivia had found, Laura's neat handwriting filling the page. "David, I wish I could tell you everything. I wish I could see your face when you find out you're going to be a father. But I can't. I'm so scared, and I don't know what else to do. Please forgive me. I hope someday you'll understand." He closed his eyes, the pain almost too much to bear. All this time, he had been living in a shadow of grief, not knowing the full story. He had blamed himself for losing her, but he had never imagined the reality she had faced alone. The next few days were a blur as he continued to dig deeper, piecing together the fragments of Laura's life. He learned how she had fled to a small town in Connecticut, changed her name, and kept to herself, always looking over her shoulder. He found out that Mark had eventually left, disappearing without a trace, leaving Laura and Olivia in peace. But the damage had already been done. David's heart ached with the knowledge that while he had been moving on, Laura had been fighting to keep their daughter safe. And now, he was faced with the truth. One he couldn't change, but one he was determined to honor. He visited Olivia that weekend, nervous and unsure of what to say. She greeted him at the door, her face guarded, still processing everything herself. They sat in her small living room, a silence settling between them. "I've been learning more about what happened," David began, his voice steady but quiet. "About why she left, why she kept me away." Olivia's eyes were wary, but she nodded. "It's a lot to take in." "She was trying to protect you," David continued, his throat tightening. "From him. From Mark." Olivia's expression shifted, a flicker of something he couldn't quite read passing over her face. "I always knew she was hiding something. I just didn't know what." David leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Olivia. I should have been there. I should have." "No," Olivia interrupted, her voice strong. "You can't blame yourself for this. She made her choices. Maybe they weren't the right ones, but she did what she thought she had to. And now we have to move forward." David nodded, swallowing hard. "I just want to be the father I should have been. For you, for Ethan." Olivia's eyes softened, and for the first time, David saw a glimmer of hope there. "We'll figure it out, David. It's going to take time, but we'll figure it out." And as they sat there, the shadows of the past slowly receding, David felt a sense of resolution. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could be there now. He could be the father, the grandfather, that he had always wanted to be. For Laura, for Olivia, for Ethan. Olivia had always imagined what it would be like to meet her father, to look into the eyes of the man she had wondered about her entire life. But now that David was standing before her, the reality was far more complicated than she had ever anticipated. Each encounter was laced with tension, an awkward dance between two people trying to bridge a gap filled with 2 decades of absence and unanswered questions. Olivia couldn't help but feel guarded, her emotions fluctuating between hope and resentment. This was the man who had unknowingly left her to face the world without him. How was she supposed to reconcile that with the man who now stood before her, desperate to make up for lost time? One evening, they sat across from each other in a small cafe, a tentative effort to move past the initial shock and pain of their reunion. Olivia stirred her coffee absently, avoiding David's gaze. He looked tired, the lines on his face more pronounced, his eyes filled with a kind of yearning that made her chest tighten. "Olivia," David began, his voice low, almost hesitant, "I know I can't make up for everything. I know I wasn't there for you, and I can't change that. But I want to be here now." She glanced up, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away again. "It's not that simple, David. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay." "I know," he said quickly, leaning forward, his hands resting on the table as if to bridge the physical distance between them. "I don't expect that. I don't want to lose more time. I've already lost so much." Olivia sighed, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let him in, but the scars of her childhood made it hard to trust. "I grew up without you. I had to watch other kids with their dads, wondering why mine wasn't there. And then, when I finally found you, it's just a lot to process." David nodded, his expression pained. "I can't even begin to imagine what that was like for you. And I hate that I wasn't there. But I'm here now, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please, Olivia, I don't want to lose any more time." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. It was clear that he was struggling, that he was trying to navigate something that neither of them fully understood. But it was hard to let go of the years of hurt, the questions that had plagued her since she was a little girl. "You can't just waltz into my life and expect me to forget everything," she said softly, her voice wavering. "It's not fair to ask that of me." "I'm not asking you to forget," David replied, his voice strained but steady. "I'm asking for a chance to prove to you that I can be here for you now, that I can be the father you deserve." Silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Olivia looked down at her hands, the coffee forgotten. She wanted to believe him, to believe that he could be the person she needed, but the fear of disappointment, of being let down again, was overwhelming. "I lost 20 years, Olivia," David said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to lose another day. I don't want to miss out on any more of your life, or Ethan's. Please, just give me a chance to be here, to be your dad." The vulnerability in his words broke something inside her. For so long, she had built walls around herself, protecting her heart from the pain of what could have been. But now, sitting across from the man who was supposed to be her father, she felt those walls start to crack. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Okay, but it's not going to be easy. And I can't promise that everything will just fall into place." David nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. "I don't need everything to be perfect. I just need a chance." And so, they began to try. It was awkward at first, stilted conversations over coffee, strained dinners where they both stumbled over what to say. But David persisted, showing up consistently, trying to learn everything he could about her life, her interests, her fears. He learned that she loved photography, a hobby she had picked up as a way to capture the moments she felt she had missed. He listened as she talked about Ethan's health struggles, the constant worry that weighed on her shoulders. And though Olivia was still guarded, she found herself opening up, little by little, letting him in. One afternoon, he picked Ethan up from school for the first time. The little boy, shy and curious, looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you my grandpa?" David's heart swelled at the question, and he crouched down to be at eye level with his grandson. "Yes, Ethan, I am, and I'm so happy to finally meet you." Ethan smiled, a small, hesitant grin that made David's chest ache with a bittersweet joy. He had missed so much, but here, in this moment, he felt a sense of hope. He spent the day with Ethan, taking him to the park, pushing him on the swings, listening as the boy chattered excitedly about his favorite superheroes. It was the kind of day David had dreamed about, but never thought he would get. When they returned to Olivia's apartment that evening, she looked at them with a soft, almost fragile smile. "How was your day?" she asked Ethan. "It was great," Ethan exclaimed, his eyes bright with excitement. "Grandpa took me to the park, and we played all day." David looked at Olivia, his heart in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me be a part of this." Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're trying, David, and I can see that. I need time." "I'll give you all the time you need," he promised, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm not going anywhere." And as he left that night, there was a sense of something shifting between them. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. A fragile, tentative start towards something they both desperately wanted. A real connection, a chance to build the relationship they had both been denied for so long. David knew there would be more difficult conversations, more moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. He was here, he was trying, and he wasn't going to give up. Not on Olivia, not on Ethan, not on the family he had finally found. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the quiet apartment. She watched Ethan, his small hands busily drawing on a piece of paper, his face scrunched in concentration. He was so full of life, so innocent, and yet, he had no idea how hard she worked to keep things steady for him. David was supposed to come over later that evening, and she found herself both nervous and relieved. Their relationship was still fragile, tentative, but he was trying. He showed up, he listened, and he was patient. It was more than she had ever expected, and yet, it scared her to hope. She glanced around the small apartment, taking in the worn-out furniture and the stacks of bills on the counter. Being a single mother was more than just hard. It was exhausting, relentless, and often overwhelming. But it was also the most important thing she had ever done. When David arrived, he found her in the kitchen, making dinner while Ethan played nearby. There was a heaviness to her movements, a kind of weary grace that made his heart ache. He watched her for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt for all the years he hadn't been there, for all the burdens she had carried alone. "Can I help with anything?" he asked, stepping into the kitchen. Olivia looked up, surprised, but then nodded toward the cutting board. "You can chop the vegetables if you want." They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic chop of the knife and the sizzle of something on the stove. It was a domestic scene, one that felt both strange and oddly comforting to David. "How do you do it?" he asked finally, his voice quiet. "Raise him, work, take care of everything on your own?" Olivia paused, the spoon in her hand hovering over the pot. She let out a sigh, shaking her head. "I don't know. Some days I don't even know how I make it through. I just do, because I have to." David nodded, setting down the knife. "I can't imagine how hard it must be." She turned to face him, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "You want to know what it's really like?" He nodded, his expression earnest. "Please, I want to understand." Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "It's waking up at 3 in the morning because your kid has a fever, and you're terrified it's something serious because you can't afford another hospital bill. It's working 2 jobs, coming home exhausted, and still having to help with homework and cook dinner. It's never having time for yourself, for anything, because every second is spent trying to keep everything from falling apart." David's heart ached as he listened. He had known she was struggling, but hearing it like this, seeing the pain and exhaustion in her eyes, made it all so much more real. "And then there's the loneliness," she continued, her voice softening. Knowing that no matter how much you love your child, it's not enough to make up for the fact that they don't have the family they deserve, that you can't give them the stability, the support that two parents could. David felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to reach out, to take her hand, but he wasn't sure if she would welcome the gesture. "I'm so sorry, Olivia, for everything. I wish I had known. I wish I could have been there for you." Olivia shook her head, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I didn't even know what I was missing, David. I just knew I had to survive, for Ethan. But now that you're here, I don't know what to do with that. I'm not used to having anyone to rely on." "You don't have to do this alone anymore," David said quietly. "I know I can't make up for the past, but I want to help. Whatever you need, I'll be there." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. It was terrifying to let herself believe it, to trust that he wouldn't just disappear like so many others had. But something inside her, something small and fragile, wanted to hope. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared to let you in, to let Ethan get close to you. Because what if you decide it's too much? What if you leave?" David's heart clenched at the raw vulnerability in her words. He took a step closer, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere, Olivia. I know I've made mistakes, and I know it's going to take time, but I'm here. I'm here for good." She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor. It's been so hard. There were times I didn't know if I could do it, if I could be enough for him." "You are more than enough," David said softly. "You're strong, Olivia. So much stronger than I think you even realize." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away quickly, as if embarrassed by her own emotions. "I just want to do right by him. I want to be the mother he deserves." "You already are," David said, his voice breaking. "You've done so much on your own, but you don't have to do it alone anymore." Olivia looked at him, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "I want to believe that. I really do. But I've been let down so many times. I don't know if I can take it again." David took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not perfect, Olivia. I'm going to make mistakes. But I promise you, I'm not going to leave. I'm here, and I'm going to do everything I can to prove that to you and to Ethan." For a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Then, slowly, Olivia nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, but you have to be patient. This isn't going to be easy." "I don't expect it to be," David said, relief washing over him. "I just want a chance to be here for you. For both of you." And as they turned back to the dinner they were making, something shifted between them. It was still fragile, still tentative, but it was there. A connection, a beginning. David saw himself in Olivia, saw his own struggles and failures reflected in her eyes. And he knew that this was his chance to finally get it right, to be the father and the grandfather that both she and Ethan deserved. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. He was part of something bigger now, something that mattered, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. David paced back and forth in his apartment, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions he could barely keep up with. For weeks now, he had been trying to rebuild a relationship with Olivia and Ethan, trying to be the father and grandfather they both deserved. But no matter how hard he tried, it felt like every step forward was met with 2 steps back. Olivia's walls were still up, her trust brittle and fragile. Despite the moments of connection, there was always a tension between them, an unspoken fear that this new bond would shatter just as quickly as it had formed. And now, he was beginning to wonder if he was doing more harm than good by staying. That evening, he met Olivia at a small park near her apartment. Ethan played nearby on the swings, his laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air. David watched him, his heart aching with a longing he hadn't known he could still feel. He turned to Olivia, who stood with her arms crossed, her expression guarded as ever. "I feel like I'm losing you," he said quietly, his voice laced with desperation. Olivia glanced at him, then quickly looked away. "You're not losing me, David. I'm trying to figure this all out. It's a lot." "I know it's a lot," he said, taking a step closer. "But I can't help feeling like I'm doing something wrong. Like maybe I should just back off. Olivia's eyes widened, and she shook her head. No, that's not what I want. It's just what? He pressed, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I'm trying, Olivia. I'm trying to be the father you never had, the grandfather Ethan needs. But if I'm making things worse, maybe I should leave. Maybe it would be better for both of you if I wasn't here. No, it wouldn't, she said quickly, her voice sharp. That's the problem, David. You can't just walk away. You can't just decide it's too hard and leave. I'm not saying it's too hard, he shot back, his voice rising. I'm saying I don't want to cause you more pain. I'm saying I don't want to be another person who lets you down. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she took a step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. Do you think leaving again would make things better? Do you think walking away would somehow fix this? David felt his heart pounding, the intensity of the moment almost overwhelming. I don't know, Olivia. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I just know that I can't stand to see you hurting because of me. Olivia's voice broke, and she turned away, her shoulders shaking. You're here now, David. You're here, and that means something. But you can't keep pushing and pulling like this. I need to know you're in this for real, that you're not going to run the moment things get hard. David stepped closer, his voice filled with emotion. I'm not running. I'm scared, yes. Scared that I'll never be good enough, that I've missed too much. But I'm here, Olivia. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. She turned back to him, tears streaming down her face. I've been let down so many times. People who were supposed to care, who were supposed to be there, just left. I can't go through that again. Not with you. His heart broke at the pain in her voice. He reached out, hesitating for a moment, then gently took her hand. I'm not leaving, Olivia. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I lost 20 years, and I can't get that back. But I don't want to lose another day. Not one more. For a long moment, they stood there, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing down on them. David could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear and hope warring for control. He knew he had to be careful, had to tread lightly, but he also knew he couldn't let her push him away. Please, he whispered, his voice raw. Don't shut me out. I know I can't fix everything, but I want to try. I want to be there for you. For Ethan, whatever it takes. Olivia took a deep, shuddering breath, then slowly nodded. I don't know how to do this, David. I don't know how to let you in, how to trust that you're going to stay. We'll figure it out together, he said softly, squeezing her hand. One step at a time. She looked at him, her eyes searching his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something like hope. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I want to try. I want to believe that you're really here. I am, he promised, his voice steady. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. They stood there, hand in hand, the tension between them slowly easing. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was something. A start. As they turned to watch Ethan playing, his laughter echoing through the park, David felt a sense of calm settle over him. This was where he was meant to be, with his daughter and grandson. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more difficult conversations, more challenges to face. But he was ready. He wasn't going to walk away. He wasn't going to let fear or guilt drive him from the people who needed him the most. He was going to fight for this, for them, for the family he had found, no matter what it took. David stood on the porch of Olivia's small house, his heart pounding as he knocked on the door. It was early evening, and the sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft, golden light over the neighborhood. He had thought long and hard about what he wanted to say, what he needed to say. This was his chance, his moment to finally make things right. Olivia opened the door, her expression guarded but not unkind. David, what are you doing here? She asked, glancing over his shoulder at Ethan, who was playing in the front yard. Can we talk? He asked gently. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and there's something I need to say. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They sat down in the small living room, the space filled with the familiar chaos of a home with a young child. Toy cars scattered on the floor, a stack of storybooks on the coffee table. David looked around, feeling a pang of regret for all the moments he had missed. I've been trying to figure out how to be in your life, How to help without overstepping, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. And I realized that it's not just about showing up or offering support. It's about being here in every way that matters. Olivia's eyes softened slightly, but there was still a hint of wariness. What do you mean? I mean, I want to be there for you, not just financially, but emotionally too, he said, leaning forward. I know I've been pushing, trying to fix things quickly, but I understand now that it's going to take time. I'm willing to be patient, to take it slow. I just want to be part of your life, in whatever way you need. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. I appreciate that, David. I really do. But it's hard to just let go of everything that's happened. There's still so much hurt, so much that I haven't dealt with. I know, he said softly, and I'm not asking you to forget or forgive overnight. I just want us to try, to keep trying, because I believe we can build something real, something good. Olivia nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. It's been so hard, David, raising Ethan on my own, trying to be strong for him when I didn't feel strong myself. And then you came into our lives, and it felt like everything was turned upside down. David reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before gently covering hers. I'm sorry I wasn't there before, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. I want to help in whatever way I can. I want to be the father you deserved, even if I'm 20 years late. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of pain and hope. I want that too. I want us to find a way to move forward, for Ethan's sake and for ours. David nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Then let's do it. Let's take it one day at a time, one step at a time. We can't change the past, but we can make the future better. For the first time, Olivia smiled, a small, tentative smile, but real. Okay, she whispered. Let's try. Over the next few weeks, they found a rhythm. David started spending more time with Ethan, taking him to school, playing with him at the park, reading him bedtime stories. He saw the joy in his grandson's eyes, felt the bond between them growing stronger each day. And with Olivia, he took things slowly, respecting her boundaries, listening more than he spoke, offering support without pressure. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Ethan chase fireflies in the yard, Olivia turned to David, her expression thoughtful. You know, I used to think that being strong meant doing everything on my own, that asking for help was a sign of weakness. David nodded, understanding the struggle she had faced. But it's not. It takes strength to ask for help, to let people in. She looked down, a tear slipping down her cheek. I've been scared, David. Scared that if I let you in, I'd get hurt again. But I see how much you love Ethan, how much you're trying, and I want to let go of that fear. David's heart swelled with emotion. He reached out, gently taking her hand. You're not alone anymore, Olivia. We're in this together. Whatever you need, I'm here. She nodded, squeezing his hand. I know, and I'm ready to let you be part of our lives. For real. They sat there in silence for a while, the night settling around them, the sound of Ethan's laughter filling the air. It wasn't perfect. There were still scars, still moments of doubt and fear. But it was a beginning. As the weeks turned into months, David and Olivia continued to build their relationship, slowly but surely. They shared stories of the past, their fears and hopes for the future. David helped Olivia with the financial burdens that had weighed on her for so long. But more importantly, he was there, present and supportive, offering love and stability in a way she had never experienced before. One day, as they walked through the park together, Ethan running ahead, David turned to Olivia, his heart full. I'm so proud of you, Olivia. You've been through so much, and you've come out stronger. She smiled at him, the warmth of her smile lighting up her face. I'm proud of us, David, for finding a way to be a family. He nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude and love. We're not perfect, but we're making it work. She looked at him, her eyes soft and filled with a peace he hadn't seen before. And that's all that matters. In that moment, David felt something shift inside him, a sense of acceptance, of healing. He had spent so long haunted by guilt, by the weight of missed chances and lost time. But now, standing here with his daughter and grandson, he felt something he hadn't dared to hope for, redemption. He reached out, taking Olivia's hand in his. She squeezed his hand gently, and they stood there, watching Ethan play, the sun setting in a blaze of colors on the horizon. "I love you, Olivia," David said quietly, his voice steady and sure. "I'm so grateful to have you in my life." "I love you too, Dad," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we found each other." And as they stood there, hand in hand, watching the beginning of a new chapter unfold before them, there was a sense of peace, of hope. They couldn't change the past, couldn't erase the years of pain and separation, but they could build something new, something beautiful, together. 3 years later, the sun shone brightly over the sprawling green lawn of the park where Olivia, David, and Ethan often spent their weekends together. The transformation in their lives was evident in every smile, every laugh that echoed through the air. David had become a constant presence, a pillar of support not only for Olivia but also for Ethan, who now looked up to his grandfather with the admiration only a child could muster. But today was different. Olivia stood by the park's entrance, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and nervousness she hadn't felt in a long time. She smoothed her hair, taking a deep breath as she scanned the area. David and Ethan were already there, playing soccer a little farther down the field, and she could hear their laughter mingling with the distant sounds of children playing and birds chirping. "You look beautiful," came a familiar voice from behind her. Olivia turned, her heart skipping a beat as she saw Jack approaching, a warm smile lighting up his face. Tall and with kind, brown eyes, Jack had entered her life almost a year ago, in the most unexpected way, at a parent-teacher meeting at Ethan's school. He was a single dad, raising his daughter Emily after losing his wife to illness. Their shared experiences, their mutual understanding of the struggles and joys of single parenthood, had drawn them together. "Hey," she said, smiling back, "you made it." "Of course," Jack replied, stepping closer. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." They stood there for a moment, a comfortable silence settling between them. Olivia felt a surge of gratitude as she looked at him. He had been patient, understanding, giving her the space to heal while offering his unwavering support. Slowly but surely, he had become a part of her life, of Ethan's life, and now, he was someone she couldn't imagine living without. "Are you ready to meet my dad?" Olivia asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and a hint of nervousness. Jack nodded, his smile reassuring. "I've been looking forward to it, and I promise I'll try not to embarrass you." Olivia laughed, the sound light and genuine. It felt good to laugh, to let go of the fears and doubts that had once held her back. Taking Jack's hand, she led him towards David and Ethan, her heart swelling with happiness as she watched her father chase after the ball, his laughter mingling with Ethan's. "Dad, I'd like you to meet someone," she called out as they approached. David turned, his face lighting up as he saw Olivia. But when his eyes landed on Jack, there was a brief flicker of surprise, followed by a smile that was both welcoming and a little cautious. "Olivia, who's this?" "Dad, this is Jack," Olivia said, her voice steady. "We've been seeing each other for a while now. I thought it was time you two met." Jack extended his hand, his expression sincere. "It's an honor to finally meet you, David. Olivia's told me so much about you." David took his hand, his grip firm but friendly. "Likewise, Jack. I've heard a lot about you too. All good things, of course." There was a moment of silence as the two men sized each other up, but then David's smile widened. "I'm glad you're here, Jack. It means a lot to me to see Olivia happy." Olivia's heart warmed at her father's words. She knew how much it meant to him to see her moving on, to know that she was finally finding her own happiness. For so long, their lives had been defined by loss and longing. But now, there was a new chapter unfolding, one filled with love and hope. As they spent the afternoon together, Olivia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She watched as Jack and David talked, their conversation easy and genuine, and as Ethan played with Emily, the two children giggling as they chased each other around the field. Later, as the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Olivia sat on a picnic blanket, leaning against Jack's shoulder. David and Ethan were sitting nearby, deep in conversation, their bond stronger than ever. "This feels perfect," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Like everything is finally where it's supposed to be." Jack wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You deserve this, Olivia. You deserve to be happy." She nodded, blinking back tears of joy. "And I am. For the first time in a long time, I really am." They sat there in silence, watching as the world around them seemed to glow with the promise of new beginnings. Olivia knew that there would still be challenges ahead, that life would never be without its struggles. But she also knew that she wasn't alone anymore. She had Jack, Ethan, and most importantly, she had her father, who had fought so hard to be a part of her life. David glanced over at her, his eyes meeting hers across the small distance between them. He smiled, a smile full of love and pride. And in that moment, Olivia felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. They had come so far, had overcome so much, and now they were here, together, stronger than ever. She reached out, taking David's hand in hers. He squeezed it gently, his eyes shining with emotion. "I love you, Dad," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet evening air. "Thank you for never giving up on us." "I love you too, sweetheart," David replied, his voice filled with warmth and sincerity. "And I'm so proud of you. For everything." As they sat there, hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Olivia felt a deep, abiding peace. This was her family, imperfect, resilient, and full of love. And as she looked at Jack, at Ethan, and at her father, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because they were stronger now. Together, they had found a way to heal, to forgive, and to embrace the life they were building. One filled with love, hope, and the promise of a beautiful new beginning. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.